They told me the fire had destroyed everything of value. Standing in the rain at 18 keys to a crumbling wreck of a cottage in my pocket, I thought they were right. I didn't know that inside the blackened chimney of my grandmother's house, a secret was waiting to rewrite my poverty-stricken existence. My entire world fit into the back seat of a rusted 2005 Ford Focus with a busted transmission. That car was my bedroom, my dining room, and my only escape from the harsh reality of being an 18-year-old with no family, no degree, and a bank account that had been hovering near double digits for 6 months. I was living in a Walmart parking lot in Portland, Maine, when the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, clipped and formal. "Is this Leonard Penhaligon?" "Speaking." I said, my voice groggy from a night of sleeping curled around the steering wheel. "Leonard, this is Elias Abernathy. I represent the estate of Evelyn Moreau. I have some complications regarding her will. We need you to come to Oakhaven immediately." Evelyn Moreau. My grandmother. The woman I hadn't seen in over a decade. She was a ghost story in my life, a recluse who lived in a cottage on the edge of the Atlantic, known for shouting at seagulls and hoarding newspapers. My parents had cut ties with her when I was 5. I remembered her only as a smell-dried lavender and wood smoke, and the rough texture of her calloused hands holding mine on the porch. "I don't have gas money to get to Oakhaven, Mr. Abernathy," I replied, the bitterness creeping into my tone. "The property is yours, Leonard. If you don't claim it within 48 hours, the town will condemn the land and seize the assets. It's better than you have nothing." Nothing. That was the summary of my life. But curiosity, that dangerous nagging itch, got the better of me. I spent my last $40 on gas, prayed the transmission wouldn't give out on the I-295, and drove north. Oakhaven wasn't a town. It was a scar on the coastline. The wind here was brutal tasting of salt and rot. When I finally found the property tucked behind a thicket of weeping willows that had gone grey with salt spray, my heart sank. It wasn't a house. It was a grave. A fire, likely electrical, or perhaps just the sheer neglect of the structure, had gutted the place years ago. The roof had collapsed inward, leaving the floorboards exposed to the elements, rotting into the dark earth. But standing in the center, defiant against the collapse, was the chimney. It was massive, a monolith of field stone and mortar, rising 30 feet into the overcast sky. It looked like a spine left behind by a giant. I stepped out of the car, my boots sinking into the mud. Elias Abernathy was waiting by the gate, his coat collar turned up against the chill. He looked at me with a mix of pity and impatience. "She kept the deed in a fireproof box," Elias said, handing me a set of heavy, rusted keys. "She left explicit instructions. She said, 'If the boy comes, let him take the stone.' I have no idea what she meant. The house is a total loss, Leonard. The insurance payout was denied because of the lack of upkeep. You've inherited a pile of rubble and a property tax bill." "Why didn't she sell it?" I asked, looking up at the skeletal chimney. "She refused to leave," Elias muttered. "I'm sorry, kid. If you need a lawyer to help you navigate the bankruptcy, I don't have money for a lawyer." I interrupted, staring at the chimney. I could see where the fire had licked the stones black. The heat must have been intense. I'll take it from here." Elias left his luxury sedan, kicking up gravel as he pulled away. I was alone. I walked toward the remains of the living room, picking my way over charred beams. The wind whistled through the gaps in the stone masonry. My grandmother had died in the master bedroom, which was now just a depression in the dirt. But she had spent her final years sitting by this chimney, wrapped in wool blankets, watching the waves. Why, I sat down on the cold hearth. It was the only part of the house that felt solid. I ran my hand over the soot-stained rock. My fingers traced a groove, a crack that ran horizontally across the third row of stones. It looked like a natural fracture, the kind caused by decades of rapid heating and cooling. But then I felt it. A draft. The wind wasn't just whistling around the stone, it was pulling through it. I leaned in my ear against the mortar. A faint, hollow sound, a whisper of air escaping a cavity. My pulse quickened. Homelessness has a way of sharpening your instincts. You learn to spot opportunity where others see trash. And this chimney wasn't just a chimney, it was a sentry. The first night was a brutal test of endurance. I slept in my car parked as close to the ruin as the mud allowed my eyes glued to the dark silhouette of the chimney through the windshield. Every rustle of the leaves set my nerves on edge. I felt like an intruder in a place that didn't want me yet. For the first time in months, I had a purpose. When dawn broke, the sky was a bruised purple. I didn't wait for coffee. I grabbed a crowbar I'd found in the trunk, my only tool, and walked back to the hearth. In the daylight, the crack was more defined. It wasn't random. It followed the line of the mortar with suspicious precision. I jammed the tip of the crowbar into the gap and applied pressure. The stone groaned. It wasn't the sound of rock grinding on rock. It was the sound of a heavy metal hinge protesting centuries of disuse. I pushed harder, my boots slipping in the mud, my muscles burning. With a sickening crunch of crumbling mortar, the entire section of the chimney face swung inward. I fell back, heart hammering against my ribs, expecting a collapse. But the structure held. It was a hollow chamber. Not a fireplace flue, but a built-in safe, hidden behind a false masonry facade. Inside, protected from the fire by the thickness of the chimney stone, sat a heavy, iron-bound trunk. It looked antique, forged in an era when things were made to last. I pulled it out. It was heavy, covered in a thick layer of dust. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. I sat in the mud and flipped the latch. It wasn't locked. Inside there was no gold, no jewelry. There were stacks of letters bound in twine and a leather-bound ledger. But beneath those, wrapped in oilcloth, was a collection of bearer bonds, high-value financial instruments from the late 1940s. I wasn't an expert, but even I knew that bearer bonds were as good as cash, provided they were authentic. I flipped through the ledger. It was written in my grandmother's spidery precise hand. It wasn't a diary. It was an inventory. August 12th, 1948. Item 42 secured. Origin, the port of Marseille. Value substantial. My grandmother wasn't a shut-in who yelled at birds. She was a courier, a smuggler of high-value antiquities and wealth operating in the shadows of the post-war era. She had spent her life guarding things that didn't belong to her, waiting for a payout that for some reason never came. I was so absorbed in the discovery that I didn't hear the tires on the gravel until they were almost at the gate. A black SUV, sleek and expensive, pulled into the overgrown driveway. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than my entire life's earnings. He walked with a predator's grace. I recognized him from the local papers, Hollis Devereux, the real estate mogul, who was buying up half the coast to build a luxury resort. He stopped 10 feet from me, his eyes flicking to the open chimney and the iron trunk in my lap. He didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed. "Leonard, isn't it?" he said, his voice smooth like oil over gravel. "You've made a bit of a mess of your property." I closed the trunk, hiding the contents. "It's my mess, Mr. Devereux. I don't recall inviting you onto the land." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold, practiced expression. "I'm in the market for coastal acquisitions. This land, it has historical significance that the town council is very interested in. I'm prepared to make you an offer, Leonard. a life-changing amount. Enough to get you out of that car and into a real home. He gestured to my rusted Focus. He had been watching me. Why? I asked, standing up. The crowbar was still in my hand. Why this pile of rubble? There are a dozen better lots along the coast. Sentimentality, he said, stepping closer. My father did business with your grandmother once. Let's just say she held on to something that doesn't belong to her. I'm here to recover it for the rightful owners. It's a matter of heritage. She didn't mention any owners. I lied my voice steady, despite the fear spiking in my gut. Devereaux's smile faltered. He looked at the trunk, then at me. You're a kid, Leonard. You're homeless, hungry, and alone. Don't play the hero. It's a dangerous game for someone with nothing to lose. Exactly, I said, gripping the crowbar tighter. I have nothing to lose, which means I'm the most dangerous person you'll ever meet. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. We'll see. The town is condemning this site in 48 hours. You'll be evicted, and the land will be seized for safety reasons. I'll be back with the demolition crew on Thursday. You'd better hope you found something worth dying for before then. He turned and walked back to his SUV. As he drove away, he left me with a chilling realization. The chimney wasn't just a secret vault. It was a target. And I had 2 days to solve a puzzle that had consumed my grandmother's entire life. I dragged the heavy iron trunk back to my rusted Ford Focus, the muscles in my arms screaming in protest. The sky above Oakhaven was turning a bruised, violent purple, signaling an incoming Atlantic squall. I locked the car doors, pulled my threadbare sleeping bag over my shoulders, and turned on the small dome light. Its yellow glow illuminated the contents of my grandmother's secret life. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the oilcloth. The bearer bonds were pristine, their intricate engravings untouched by the fire or the decades. I recognized the seal, 1934, Series United States Treasury bearer bonds. Each one bore a face value of $10,000. There were at least 50 of them. $500,000 in 1934, currency worth exponentially more today, completely untraceable. But Hollis Devereaux hadn't come to a ruined cottage in the mud for $500,000. Men like him spent that on yachts. The bonds were bait, or perhaps just a down payment. The real treasure was the ledger. I opened the leather-bound book. The first few pages were standard accounting, grocery bills, property taxes, from the late 1960s, mundane details of a solitary life. But halfway through the ink changed from a faded blue ballpoint to a sharp black fountain pen. The language shifted too. It wasn't English. It looked like German interspersed with complex alphanumeric codes. I cursed my lack of education. I was a high school dropout whose greatest academic achievement was passing sophomore geometry. But homelessness teaches you to look for the things people throw away, to find the hidden utility in the discarded. I ran my thumb along the binding of the ledger. It felt unnaturally thick. Taking my pocket knife, I carefully slit the fabric of the inner spine. A single folded piece of translucent tracing paper slipped out, covered in a grid of letters. A decryption matrix. For the next 3 hours, while the rain began to hammer against the roof of my car like handfuls of gravel, I worked. I held the tracing paper over the coded pages, matching the grids to the text. Slowly, horrifyingly, the truth of Evelyn Moreau spilled out into the cramped, damp cabin of my car. My grandmother wasn't a smuggler. She was a hunter. During the aftermath of World War II, Evelyn had worked as a civilian archivist for the Roberts Commission, the real-life precursor to the Monuments Men. Her job was to catalogue recovered assets, but she had stumbled upon a rat line, a shadow network of corrupt officials, siphoning off recovered wealth before it could be returned to the survivors of the Holocaust, and the architect of that network in the United States, Charles Devereux, Hollis's father. The ledger was a master list. It detailed exact coordinates, Union Bank of Switzerland account numbers, and the private vault locations of billions of dollars in stolen European antiquities, gold reserves, and seized corporate shares. Evelyn hadn't stolen the wealth. She had stolen the map to it, effectively freezing the syndicate's assets. She had hidden the ledger in the chimney, isolating herself in this desolate coastal ruin to protect her family from the syndicate's wrath. She pushed my parents away not because she didn't love them, but because being near her was a death sentence. I stared at the decoded names, real private families, whose generational wealth had been swallowed by the Devereux Empire. Hollis wasn't trying to recover a lost family heirloom. He was trying to destroy the only piece of evidence that could unravel his entire billionaire empire and send him to federal prison. A loud crack shattered my concentration. I jumped, banging my head against the roof of the car. The dome light flickered. I killed it instantly, plunging the car into darkness. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I saw two beams of light sweeping across the ruined foundation of the house. It wasn't Devereux's sleek SUV. It was a matte black pickup truck. Two men stepped out. They weren't wearing suits. They wore dark tactical gear. One of them held a suppressed firearm, the elongated barrel, a stark silhouette against the storm. Devereux wasn't waiting for the 48-hour eviction notice. He had sent a cleanup crew. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I couldn't fight two armed professionals. I grabbed my canvas backpack, shoved the ledger, the decryption key, and the bonds inside, and carefully opened the passenger side door, slipping out into the freezing mud. I crawled on my stomach, the icy rain soaking through my clothes instantly. The men were advancing on the chimney, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Check the stones," one of them barked over the wind. "Boss said the kid cracked it open." I needed a distraction. I was near the collapsed remains of the kitchen. A rusted propane tank, half buried in the debris, caught my eye. It was ancient, probably empty, but I didn't need it to explode. I just needed it to make noise. I picked up a heavy chunk of charred brick, took a breath, and hurled it as hard as I could at the tank. It struck the rusted metal with a deafening hollow clang that echoed over the roaring wind. Both flashlights snapped toward the sound. "Over there." As they rushed toward the kitchen debris, their boots slipping on the treacherous wet wood, I sprinted in the opposite direction, toward the dense line of weeping willows that bordered the property. "Hey, stop!" a voice roared behind me. A suppressed gunshot made a quiet thwip sound, and a chunk of bark exploded from a tree just inches from my face. I threw myself into the thicket, ignoring the thorny branches tearing at my face and jacket. I knew the woods behind the property led to a steep embankment, dropping off into the rocky shoreline. I scrambled down the muddy slope, sliding uncontrollably, my hands desperately grabbing at roots to slow my descent. I hit the rocky beach hard, twisting my ankle, but the adrenaline masked the pain. I pressed my back against the cold, wet cliff face, listening. Above me, I could hear the men thrashing through the brush, their flashlight beams sweeping over the edge, illuminating the churning black ocean below. "I don't see him," one yelled. "He probably fell in. Tide's coming in fast." "Boss wants the book, not the kid," the other replied. "Tear the car apart. If it's not there, we burn the rest of this place to the ground." I stood frozen against the rocks for what felt like hours, clutching the backpack to my chest, the roar of the Atlantic drowning out my ragged breathing. I was 18, soaked to the bone, hunted by killers and holding the key to a global conspiracy. I had to survive the night. But more importantly, I had to make sure Evelyn Moreau's sacrifice wasn't in vain. The night dragged on in agonizing, freezing increments. I huddled in a small sea cave, shivering so violently my teeth felt loose. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the suppressed barrel of the gun. But I also saw the neat, precise handwriting of my grandmother. She had lived with this terror for 50 years. I only had to endure it for one night. As the first grey light of dawn began to bleed through the storm clouds, the tide receded enough for me to climb back up the embankment. I crept through the woods, peering through the willows. My car was destroyed. The windows were smashed, the seats slashed to ribbons, the tires flattened. The ruins of the cottage were still there, but the air smelled of fresh gasoline. They hadn't found the ledger, and they were preparing to incinerate the site completely. I couldn't just run. If I went to the local police, Devereux would likely own them, or at least have enough influence to bury me in a holding cell while the ledger disappeared into an evidence locker forever. I needed a nuclear option. I needed an entity bigger than Hollis Devereux. I limped 3 miles down the coastal highway until I reached a rundown 24-hour truck stop. The neon sign buzzed angrily in the morning fog. I walked inside, dripping mud and seawater, onto the linoleum, ignoring the alarmed look of the cashier. I slapped a damp $10 bill on the counter. "I need your phone. Now." And an envelope. I took the landline into a back booth. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I didn't call the police. Thanks to a documentary I'd watched on a library computer a year ago, while trying to stay warm, I knew exactly who handled this specific type of international crime. I called the main switchboard for the FBI in Washington, D.C., and demanded to be transferred to the art crime team. When a confused agent finally answered, I didn't give them my name. I gave them account numbers. "Write this down," I demanded, my voice cracking. I read off 3 Union Bank of Switzerland account numbers from the ledger, along with the names of the original rightful owners and the dates they were plundered. Cross-reference those with the Roberts Commission archives. You'll find they match perfectly. I have the master ledger detailing the entire Charles Devereux smuggling syndicate. The line went dead silent. Then the agent's tone shifted from bored to intensely focused. "Who is this? Where are you?" "I'm mailing copies to the New York Times in 10 minutes. I lied. "But the physical ledger is at the Moreau property in Oak Haven, Maine. Hollis Devereux is about to destroy it. You have maybe an hour before federal evidence goes up in smoke." I hung up. I took the decryption key, put it in the envelope, addressed it to a P.O. box I had previously used in Portland, and dropped it in the diner's outgoing mail. Without the key, the ledger was useless, which meant Devereux couldn't just steal it back. He needed me. I walked back to the property. By the time I arrived, the rain had stopped, leaving a heavy, oppressive fog. A massive yellow bulldozer was idling by the gate. Devereux's black SUV was parked next to it. Hollis Devereux was standing by the stone chimney, looking at his watch, his cashmere coat pristine against the destruction. I walked straight through the gate, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. Devereux looked up. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed into a predatory squint. He gestured to the 2 men from the night before, who immediately stepped out from behind the bulldozer, hands resting on their holstered weapons. "Leonard." Devereux said, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "You look terrible. I was beginning to worry you'd drowned. I see you have a backpack. You destroyed my home." I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You don't have a home. You're a vagrant, playing a game you don't understand," he replied, taking a step towards me. "Hand over the bag. I'll give you $50,000 cash right now. You walk away, buy a new car, start a new life. Refuse, and my men will bury you under the foundation of this house, and I take the bag anyway." "It's over, Hollis," I said, gripping the straps of the backpack. The game ended an hour ago. He scoffed. You think you can bluff me? I don't have to, I said. I called the FBI's art crime team. I gave them your father's UBS account numbers. I gave them the names of the families he robbed. By now they are pulling the Roberts Commission files, and they are seeing exactly what I saw. They know about the syndicate. Devereaux's smile vanished. His face went pale, a stark contrast to his dark hair. You're lying. You're a homeless kid. You don't even know what those numbers mean. I know that destroying this property now is tampering with federal evidence, I said, standing my ground. And I know that if you shoot me, you're not just a white-collar criminal anymore. You're a murderer, and Washington won't stop until they tear your empire down to the studs. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the idling engine of the bulldozer. Devereaux stared at me, calculating the odds, realizing the trap had sprung. He looked at his men. They looked nervous. Paid thugs don't sign up for federal heat. Before Devereaux could make a move, a sound pierced the heavy coastal air. Sirens. Not the slow wail of local police, but a chorus of them growing louder, tearing down the coastal highway. State police federal vehicles, a small army converging on Oakhaven. Devereaux's shoulders slumped. The arrogant billionaire evaporated, leaving behind a terrified man whose legacy was about to be exposed to the world. He turned without a word, got into his SUV, and slammed the door. He didn't even look back as the first black government cruisers swerved into the driveway, blocking his exit. Agents swarmed the property. I collapsed onto my knees in the mud, clutching the backpack, the adrenaline finally leaving my system in a rush that left me dizzy. The aftermath was a blur of interviews, federal offices, and endless paperwork. The ledger was authenticated. It became the cornerstone of the largest international asset recovery operation in modern history. Hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen art gold and properties were tracked down and returned to the descendants of the families Charles Devereaux had exploited. Hollis Devereaux was indicted on multiple federal charges, his empire seized, his reputation destroyed. As for me, the U.S. Treasury bearer bonds I found in the trunk were deemed legitimate and legally in my grandmother's possession, her insurance policy. Because I was her sole heir, and because my cooperation was vital to the federal investigation, I was awarded the full value of the bonds, plus a substantial whistleblower reward from the recovered assets. I was 18 years old, and I was suddenly a multimillionaire. But the money didn't fix everything overnight. The trauma of the streets, the fear from that night in the rain took years of therapy to manage. What truly healed me, though, was learning the truth about Evelyn. She wasn't a crazy old woman hoarding newspapers. She was a guardian, a silent sentinel who sacrificed her own happiness, her own family, to stand watch over the darkest secrets of history, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to finish the job. I rebuilt the house in Oakhaven, not as a mansion, but exactly as it had been, just a simple cottage by the sea. But I left the chimney exactly as it was, massive, imposing, and slightly cracked, a monument to the woman who saved my life and the secret that changed the world. That cracked chimney didn't just hold a fortune, it held my grandmother's bravery. She sacrificed her reputation to protect history, and in the end, her secret saved my life. From sleeping in a rusted car to honoring her legacy, this journey proved that sometimes our darkest ashes hide the brightest truths. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible real-life mysteries.